Welcome to the United States Environmental Protection Agency's virtual public meeting presentation for the Salford Quarry Superfund site, Operable Unit 1 Proposed Plan for Cleanup. My name is Katie Page, and I'm the EPA Community Involvement Coordinator for the site. You will also be hearing from Sharon Fang, the Remedial Project Manager for the site, during this presentation. The EPA is committed to protecting public health. With the current COVID-19 health emergency restrictions and recommendations, this video is being published in place of an in-person public meeting. The presentation in this video has the same information that EPA would have shared during an in-person meeting. As we begin this presentation, we acknowledge that the Salford Quarry site, along with EPA's office in Philadelphia, is on the ancestral lands of the Lenape people, whose presence and resilience in Pennsylvania continues to this day. A land acknowledgement is one way to honor the original caretakers of this land and support the resilience and strength that all Indigenous peoples have shown around the world. The goal of this presentation is to provide information on the Salford Quarry site and the Superfund cleanup process. Sharon will discuss the proposed plan for the cleanup of a portion of the site EPA calls Operable Unit 1, or as sometimes you'll see in the slides and document as OU1. Operable Unit 1 refers to the waste that was disposed of in the quarry and soil around the quarry that was contaminated by that disposal. Sharon will talk more about this later. EPA is looking for your comments on this cleanup plan. We are accepting comments in a number of ways on the plan for cleanup at the site. Details on how you can provide comments to EPA will be covered at the end of this presentation. Please see the Salford Quarry site webpage for the full text of documents discussed here and additional information or updates on the site at any time. Sharon, please go ahead.
Thank you, Katie. Hello, everyone. My name is Sharon Fang, and as Katie mentioned, I'm the Remedial Project Manager for the Salford Quarry Superfund site. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this virtual public meeting for the Salford Quarry Superfund site Operable Unit 1 Proposed Plan for Cleanup. I'm going to tell you about the cleanup that was chosen in 2013, share with you why we have to change it, explain our preferred cleanup. Then I'll delve into the background and history of the site, describe how EPA evaluated the options for this new cleanup, and determined our preferred cleanup for addressing the site contamination for Operable Unit 1. At the end, I'll turn it back to Katie so she can tell you how to submit your comments. In 2013, EPA issued a final cleanup plan called a Record of Decision for the Salford Quarry Superfund site, Operable Unit 1, which included waste, contaminated soil, and sediment. This slide summarizes the chosen cleanup, construction of an engineered cell on the quarry property to contain the contaminated material. Here's a picture of the engineered cell. As you can see in the slide, an engineered cell has a bottom liner, sides, and a top cover to contain contamination inside the cell. There's more detail on both the bottom liner and the top cover shown on this figure. As you can see, there are several layers to each part to keep the contamination inside. Under the 2013 Record of Decision, EPA had planned to place the waste, soil, and sediment at Salford Quarry inside a cell like this. During the design of the engineered cell, EPA realized that there wouldn't be enough space next to the quarry to be able to temporarily store the waste, soil, and sediment during construction. To make matters more complex, if the site material were to be stored off-site, land disposal requirements would be triggered, meaning that the material would need to be treated at a facility permitted to treat hazardous waste before returning the material back on the quarry property. And when the material is dug out, the volume would expand. And then when it's treated, it would expand even more. So there wouldn't even be enough space in the cell to hold all this material if it were to be trucked off-site, treated, and returned. This slide shows the quarry. The flat grassy area is the current quarry cap. The cap is about 1.5 acres of the 3-acre property. Looking at this slide, Quarry Road is behind me and to the right. The rest of the 3-acre property is a thin strip of land at the top of the exposed rock walls. There wouldn't be enough space to temporarily store waste and contaminated soil while a cell were being built. This slide shows Quarry Road. If I were standing on the cap, Looking down at Quarry Road, on the other side, the ground drops into the floodplain of the west branch of the Skippack Creek. We wouldn't be able to temporarily store waste or contaminated soil here either. So we need to change or amend the cleanup selected in 2013. This proposed plan shares the rationale for changing the cleanup and suggests EPA's preferred cleanup. The final cleanup plan for Operable Unit 1 will be issued in a record of decision amendment after our public comment period closes and your comments are considered. In this proposed plan, EPA prefers what we call WS11. WS stands for waste and soil. We use that naming convention to keep track of the waste and soil cleanup options. WS11 includes constructing a perimeter wall and cap to contain the contaminated material on site. We are looking to prevent direct contact and minimize water, both groundwater and surface runoff, from carrying the contamination in the quarry into the environment. A perimeter wall is a wall that's installed underground to stop groundwater from flowing into the waste from the sides. It can be built out of various materials, such as bentonite slurry, high injection grout, or sheet pile metal. Both the perimeter wall and the waste would be beneath a cap designed to contain hazardous waste. This type of cap is referred to as a RCRA cap. RCRA stands for Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, which is the law that created the standards for properly managing hazardous waste. You'll see this term RCRA throughout the slides and proposed plan. Excess contaminated material that cannot fit beneath the cap will be disposed of off-site. Because of limited space under the cap, EPA will address the sediment as part of Operable Unit 2. The cost of WS11 is about $6 million, which is the average of the 3 different types of perimeter walls. More detail about the cleanup and the costs can be found in the proposed plan online. Now that you know what our preferred cleanup is, here's some site history. The Salford Quarry site is located at 610 Quarry Road in Lower Salford Township, often called Harleysville. This is in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. The site's about 30 miles northwest of Philadelphia. The box on this map shows an outline of the Salford Quarry property. The quarry property was used from the early 1900s to the 1930s as a shale quarry until water collecting in the bottom of the quarry caused difficulties in removing more rock. Afterwards, locals used the property as a swimming hole. Then, in the 1950s, a waste disposal company disposed of industrial, commercial, and residential waste into the unlined quarry. In 1963, a company called American Olean Tile, or AOT, as you'll see on the slide, purchased the property and disposed of tile waste, glazed sludge, settlement pond sediment, and 2 10,000-gallon former oil tanks into the quarry. Borosilicate, a form of boron, was used in that glaze. In 1980, the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Resources, which is now the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, or what we call PADEP, notified American Olean Tile that it was in violation for failure to have a permit. American Olean Tile located the 2 buried 10,000-gallon tanks and sampled the contents. Pennsylvania allowed them to bury the tanks after removing the fuel oil. In May 1982, American Olean Tile closed the landfill by grading and capping the waste with approximately 6 feet of clay. Here's a picture of the current clay cap. It looks like a grassy field. In 1987, the site was proposed to the National Priorities List, which is commonly referred to as the Superfund list. However, the court delisted the site based upon a challenge from the responsible party. In 1993, the responsible party declared bankruptcy, leaving EPA to perform any work at the site. A trust was established to perform operation and maintenance of the clay cap and conduct groundwater monitoring. Under EPA's removal program, the responsible party supplied bottled water to affected residents until a water line was extended to 113 homes. Salford Quarry officially became a Superfund site in 2009, which means EPA considers it a priority to address contamination. Once the site was officially added, EPA could continue to perform cleanup activities. Cleaning up Superfund sites is a multi-phase process. The Salford Quarry site underwent site assessment and remedial investigation and feasibility study before it was relisted in 2009. During the remedial investigation, the nature and extent of contamination was identified, and a risk assessment was conducted. The draft remedial investigation feasibility study report was issued in 2007 for all environmental media: waste, soil, groundwater, surface water, and sediment. After the 2007 remedial investigation and feasibility study, EPA split the site into operable units in order to move Operable Unit 1 through the cleanup process. Operable Unit 1 is the waste and contaminated soil, which is the source of contamination to the groundwater, surface water, and sediment. Once Operable Unit 1's cleanup is in place, EPA will monitor the groundwater, surface water, and sediment. This data will inform what the cleanup needs to be under Operable Unit 2. Right now, EPA doesn't believe that vapor intrusion is an issue at the site. However, we included it in Operable Unit 2 if the monitoring data shows that cleanup may be needed. Here's a picture of Salford Quarry's site features. The red line is the quarry property. The light green area inside that red line is the 1.5 acre quarry cap. Quarry Road runs along the west edge of the site, and the west branch of the Skippack Creek is on the other side of Quarry Road. The surface water and sediment samples from the 2007 remedial investigation were taken next to and in the creek, as you can see by the orange sampling points. The red dots on the figure are monitoring wells. That's how we sample water in the ground. Monitoring wells immediately surrounding the quarry were part of the original investigation. They're labeled MW1 through MW10. During design, more wells were installed in 2014 near the quarry, but at deeper intervals, called B and C, at existing well locations MW1, MW8, and MW9. Groundwater runs from the quarry to the southwest. During design, we tried to place a well cluster further down gradient from where MW10 is, but we weren't able to get access. Then in 2018, we were able to place 4 wells down gradient to fill this data gap. These are shown in the box over on the left. The red property line in this box gives you an idea of these well locations with respect to the quarry. And these wells are named MW11, MW11B, MW12, and MW12B. Now I'm going to talk about the risks associated with the site soils. Investigation results for soil show unacceptable risk to a future child resident living on the quarry from metals. This slide shows where the soil samples were taken. Exceedances were at SL07 and SL08. Surface and subsurface soils were collected at 5 locations situated around the perimeter of the landfill and 3 locations off-site and up gradient from the landfill. Each sample location had surface soils taken from 0 to 6 inches below ground surface, and another interval called a subsurface soil sample taken from 6 inches to 24 inches below ground surface. As I mentioned, SL07 and SL08 were the only samples that showed unacceptable risk. Now I'm going to talk about the risks associated with the waste buried in the quarry. During the investigations, EPA found tile and municipal waste to the bedrock surface, which is between 35.5 to 37.5 feet below ground surface. Cadmium and lead concentrations in the tile waste exceeded federal regulatory limits for hazardous waste. which indicates the potential for these contaminants to migrate into groundwater. There's no federal limit for boron, even though boron is detected at extremely high levels in the upper tile waste and is pervasive throughout both the tile and municipal waste. Investigations show boron contamination in the waste could leach into groundwater. The toxicity characteristic leaching procedure methodology is used to determine if a waste is hazardous. The process simulates leaching through a landfill. As previously mentioned, the quarry waste is hazardous for cadmium and lead, but boron, which is what we're seeing as impacting the groundwater, has no federal limit for this toxicity characteristic leaching procedure or no federal limit for drinking water. So EPA developed a risk-based concentration for boron in groundwater. This risk-based concentration is 4,000 micrograms per liter, or what we'll call parts per billion. The groundwater beneath the quarry is consistently 200,000 parts per billion or more. This is almost 3 orders of magnitude higher than the acceptable risk. There is unacceptable risk to future residents living on the quarry and drinking water beneath the quarry. The good news is that no one is currently living on the quarry and drinking the groundwater. A water line was installed for residents in the 1990s. However, it's EPA's policy to clean groundwater to beneficial reuse, meaning back to its intended use. At Salford Quarry, that intended use is drinking water. This slide shows the plume of boron from the early 1990s. This plume informed our conceptual site model of how groundwater carries contamination from the quarry waste down gradient. This next slide shows that conceptual site model of waste being carried down gradient by groundwater in a cross-section view. So that means if you were to take the plan view and cut it in half and look at things moving up and down. This slide shows boron concentrations from 2004. It shows the area of groundwater contamination above the risk-based standards. This area appears to have receded compared to the previous slide from the early 90s, and it appears that this area is in the area immediately surrounding the quarry. EPA thinks that this has happened for a few reasons. Firstly, a water line was extended to 113 residents, so there was no longer pumping that was pulling that water down gradient. That water line was completed in 1995. Secondly, the landfill was capped in 1982. That cap decreased the amount of rainwater that was able to come down into the waste and flow through the waste and out as groundwater. And number 3, fewer residential wells were open to be sampled. That was just a construct of the water line being extended. Many residents opted to abandon their groundwater wells that they used to use for drinking. So there were fewer sampling points. This figure shows the data from March 2019. Groundwater in the immediate vicinity of the quarry continues to be impacted by the water table residing within the landfill waste. You can see at MW2, which is right at the west edge of the quarry, there are 408,000 parts per billion of boron. Just as a reminder, our risk-based standard is 4,000. MW10, which is the well down in the floodplain, the closest to the site, but not on the quarry property, has a boron concentration of 31,300 parts per billion. While this is still above the risk-based standard, the concentration of boron has fallen an order of magnitude in about 500 feet down gradient of the quarry. Now look at the wells furthest from the quarry, MW11, 11B, 12, and 12B. They're in the pull-out box to the left. All 4 wells are still below the risk-based concentration of 4,000 parts per billion. We have groundwater data from 2014 during design, 2017, 2018, as well as the 2019 data that's presented on this slide. And high levels of boron in groundwater continue to persist beneath the quarry, extending slightly off the property. The waste soil to groundwater pathway will continue until migration of contaminants from the source to groundwater is addressed. And that's why we're looking at cleaning up the site, is to stop that source from continuing to feed the groundwater contamination. This slide shows the volatile organic compounds in groundwater. It might be a little bit hard to read these levels, but they've been consistently low throughout time. This is the most recent concentrations from March 2019, and directly under the quarry, they're very close to the drinking water limit. So as I mentioned before, we don't think that vapor intrusion is an issue, and it relates to this, is because the levels of volatile organic compounds is fairly low and limited to right beneath the quarry. During design, EPA found the groundwater level inside the quarry waste is higher than the water level outside the waste. This slide shows the mounding of the groundwater table inside the quarry waste. Groundwater would run from the red to the yellow to the green contours in the direction of the white arrows. Near the top of the quarry, it looks as if the water's running radially for a little bit, but the overall general direction of the groundwater is to the southwest. This mounding of groundwater within the quarry could result in additional migration of contaminants from the waste to the groundwater. EPA also found that the clay cap that was installed in 1982 has lost some of its original integrity to keep rainwater out of the quarry waste. When it rains, the water percolates through the waste. The water level rises and provides an additional opportunity for contamination in the waste to be mobilized into the groundwater. EPA has defined specific goals called Remedial Action Objectives to ensure the preferred cleanup reduces unacceptable risk to human health and the environment. This slide shows you what the objectives for the cleanup at Salford Quarry are: preventing human and environmental exposure from the pathways listed, preventing and minimizing the migration of contamination from waste and soil to groundwater, preventing and minimizing the impacts to the creek. These are the same remedial action objectives as in the 2013 record of decision. The objectives pertaining to sediment were deleted since we're now dealing with sediment under Operable Unit 2. In order to change the 2013 cleanup plan, EPA conducted a revised feasibility study to identify and evaluate options to protect human health and the environment from potential risks associated with Operable Unit 1. The options considered for waste and soil are shown here. WS01 is no action. WS10 is in situ solidification stabilization. WS11 is a perimeter wall and a Resource Conservation and Recovery Act cap. WS15 is an engineered cell that was originally selected in the 2013 ROD, but it was modified because not enough space was available near the quarry to build it as it was put forth in that record of decision. Alternative WS1 is a no action alternative and required by the National Contingency Plan to provide a baseline. No action means that EPA would not take an action to remediate the contamination. This would only be selected if the site were currently protective of human health and the environment. The cost of this alternative is zero. Alternative WS10, 2 solidification stabilization. This entails mixing the waste and soil in the ground or in situ with a stabilizer to immobilize and keep the contaminants in place. The stabilizer is often Portland cement, but could be other materials based on a treatability study that must be performed during design. After the material is solidified or stabilized, a protective cap would be placed over top. Mixing the waste and soil would increase the volume of the waste, so excess material would need to be trucked off-site for disposal. The cost estimate is $16 million. Alternative WS11 entails installing a perimeter wall underground around the waste and placing a hazardous waste cap on top. As I described before, the wall will prevent groundwater from entering in the sides of the quarry, and the cap would prevent rainwater and runoff from entering the top of the waste. This would also decrease the groundwater mounding currently existing in the quarry and minimize the amount of water passing through the waste. The cost estimate averages around $6 million. Alternative WS15 is the cleanup selected in the 2013 Record of Decision. And it's an engineered cell. This cleanup's modified because there isn't enough room to stage the material next to the quarry. This option includes temporarily storing the material off-site, which triggers regulations requiring treatment before placing it back in the quarry. Excess volume would need to be disposed of off-site. And because this material will be treated, a protective clay cap would be placed over top as opposed to a RCRA or hazardous waste cap. The cost estimate is about $25 million. All of these options, except for no action, would require regrading and revegetating, monitoring groundwater, surface water, and sediment, operation and maintenance of the cleanup, engineering and legal controls to prevent access. When EPA develops the cleanup plan for any site, there are 9 criteria that we use to evaluate the possible cleanup options. EPA completed an individual evaluation of each cleanup option for the Salford Quarry site against the threshold and primary balancing criteria listed on the slide. We then evaluate the relative advantages and disadvantages of our preferred cleanup based on the consideration of these 7 criteria. The public comment phase allows us to evaluate the modifying criteria, state acceptance and community acceptance. This public comment period is important because it allows us an opportunity to seek feedback from you, the community, before making any final decisions regarding our long-term cleanup plan for the Salford Quarry site. This slide shows how EPA evaluated cleanup options through the lens of the 7 criteria. Since alternative WS1 doesn't take an action, it doesn't meet the first criteria of protecting human health and the environment. The other 3 cleanup options are evaluated for each of the top 7 criteria in the proposed plan. The community acceptance will be evaluated in response to your questions and comments submitted during this comment period. State acceptance will also be evaluated from Pennsylvania's comments during the same time period. EPA's preferred cleanup is WS11, the perimeter wall and Resource Conservation and Recovery Act cap, since it effectively addresses the source material for the least cost and can be constructed in less than a year with the least disruption. This slide shows the elements expected under this cleanup. This slide shows a cross-section of the quarry. The sky is at the top, bedrock surrounds the waste and is at the bottom. The blue line represents groundwater. The black vertical lines on both sides of the waste are the perimeter wall. Imagine this is a slice because the wall encircles the waste. And the hatched arc on top of the waste is the cap. So what do we mean when we say perimeter wall and multi-layer impermeable cap? We're proposing to install a perimeter wall underground to circle the waste that's being impacted by the groundwater. The wall would be connected to the top of the quarry rock to minimize the amount of water that can flow into the waste from the sides. These walls can be different materials. We priced out 3 different types: bentonite slurry, grout barrier, or sheet pile. We're intentionally allowing the designers and construction contractors the flexibility to select the material of the wall based upon criteria needed to keep the water out. Even though the bottom of the quarry will remain as is, EPA doesn't anticipate much water being able to rise into the waste with the wall and the cap. As I mentioned before, the quarry stopped mining shale when they had difficulty dealing with the water, so the natural elevation of groundwater should be close to the bottom of the quarry, if not below the bottom of the quarry during dry times of the year. Currently, water is mounding inside the quarry footprint, likely due to rain and runoff coming down through the top. Once the cleanup is in place, EPA expects the water table to revert to its natural level. This slide shows a schematic of what we expect to happen with that groundwater after cleanup. This slide shows EPA's preferred cleanup for soil and waste. Once in place, monitoring will occur to see how this affects groundwater, surface water, and sediment. Just to recap, cleanup of Operable Unit 1 will inform what we do for Operable Unit 2 at the Salford Quarry Superfund site.
Thanks, Sharon, for that detailed explanation of Operable Unit 1 and EPA's preferred cleanup. Additional information can be found in the administrative record, which can be found on the site webpage, www.epa.gov/superfund/Salford Quarry. Following the public comment period, we will issue the Record of Decision Amendment, which is the formal and legal document that includes the changed cleanup plan for Operable Unit 1. The Record of Decision Amendment will contain EPA's responses to your submitted comments in a responsiveness summary. After the Record of Decision Amendment, EPA will enter the phase of remedial design and remedial action. This is when detailed engineered plans are developed and cleanup action is performed in the field. As Sharon also explained, this is EPA's preferred cleanup, but community input and questions are considered. That is why EPA is accepting comments on this proposed cleanup between December 15th, 2020 and February 12th, 2021. We extended the public comment period to allow extra time for comment because of the holidays. Comments can be submitted 3 ways, and all means of submission will be treated equally. You can submit comments via mail to US EPA Region 3, Attention Katie Page, 1650 Arch Street, mail code 3RA22, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania 19103. Comments can also be submitted via email to fang.sharon@epa.gov, or verbal comments will be accepted via phone by calling 215-814-2009. Please note that the phone number provided is a voicemail box only, and you must leave a message with your comments. Remember to speak slowly and clearly and include your name and phone number in case we need to reach you for any clarifications. Thank you again for taking the time to listen to this presentation on the proposed plan for Operable Unit 1 at the Salford Quarry Superfund site. And please feel free to contact us with any questions or comments.